to the Point of Impact podcast with Rick McDaniel. Thanks for joining us today. Get ready to be inspired and motivated to live a high-impact life. Now, here's Rick.
Welcome to the Point of Impact podcast. I'm Rick McDaniel. Today is a special treat. Usually when you listen, you're hearing me talk about various subjects, but today I'm going to do an interview. In the 6 seasons that we've had on the Point of Impact podcast, I've only done 6 interviews. And all of them, by the way, just happen to have been men. But today, you're going to have a special treat because somebody that I know well, my cousin and a very successful businesswoman, Deb Boblitt, is going to join us in just a moment. And we're going to talk about her book. And we're also going to talk about her career and her life and her journey of success in business. But before we do that, I just want to mention to you that my new book, Greater, is coming out on November the 18th. I'm so excited to share this book with you. It is a great book for inspiring you to believe for greater in your life. It is a 100 devotion book. So it's a devotional book with 100 devotions, and it's coming out on November 18th. I hope that you will take advantage of maybe even pre-ordering the book, which is always great for authors. And for you, it means you're going to get the book before everybody else does. But coming out on November 18th, Greater. All right. Deb, it's great to have you with us. Bold Mission is your book that you wrote about your insights after many years of success in the business world. And I want to begin by asking you about your transition, how you changed in your career, starting out as an educator and then turning into the business world. So tell us about that.
I will, be glad to. So I was a special education teacher, and I was in it for probably 2.5, almost 3 years, when all of a sudden I got a call. And it was a call from someone I had not known before. And they said, would you be interested in owning your own business? And at that stage of my career, even though it was early into my career, I already knew I was in the wrong field. It was not for me. I was unhappy. I didn't feel like I was fulfilled in any way. I just knew that there's no way that I was going to be staying in that particular field. So when I got that call, it was intriguing. I said, well, what do I have to lose, right? Let me talk to this person. So when we sat down with the gentleman who basically presented this idea to me, I found out that he got my name from the university because I had always kept my resume updated. I really don't know why, to this day, why I did that, because it was years after graduation, my master's degree, etc. But I always kept it updated, and that's what he used as a basis or a source for talking with people who might be interested. So we sat down together, we had lunch together, and I was intrigued immediately because when he said to me, you could be owning your own business, and at that time, and it's still true today, it's the one position in life, probably across the board, where the sky's the limit. How hard you work is literally directly related to what you earn. So how much time you put in is how much you can earn.
Yeah.
Well, I was a hard worker always by nature, and so that was very appealing to me, and I love people. So the more we started talking, we'd meet occasionally, he'd tell me a little bit more about it. I made the decision, and it was a huge one, to jump in and swim. It was insurance. I had no idea any of the intricacies of insurance. Of course, I had it on my car, on our home, but I could never explain everything to you. And I thought, I must be crazy, right? Why would I go into this kind of a field I know nothing about? So the more, though, we talked, the more I realized that they had a great training program. And by the time I was ready to open my doors, if I got that far, then I definitely would know what I was talking about. So we worked together over a period of many, many months. And interestingly enough, at that same time, I was in education, and I was running a program called Cities in Schools. And it was for a particular county in Ohio at the time. And the individuals who had created Cities in Schools were located in Washington, D.C. And they flew out and met me, and I was very excited about what I was doing at the time because I was no longer teaching, I was running a program. And they said, we have an opportunity for you that we want you to take. And it'll happen probably in the next year, and we want you to run and be the first person that we have assigned to a state. And we'd like you to run all the programs for the state of Ohio called Cities in Schools. And of course, that was very exciting as well.
Yeah.
So, and I'd already finished my master's degree plus 24 hours toward a doctoral degree in administration supervision. And so anything at that level of leadership level was appealing anyway. So I prayed and I said, Lord, what do you want me to do? If I leave education, I'm leaving a paycheck, right? A monthly paycheck, weekly, biweekly paycheck, however I was paid at the time. And I had already invested in teachers' retirement. So I would lose all that in the future. And then I had like two choices. So I really prayed about it, and with my husband Ed as well, and said, you know what, I need direction. Should I be looking this way or should I be looking that way? And the decision that we made was, you know what, if that other door doesn't open, we have a date that the one for this insurance company opens for you. They want you to start October 1. Okay. And that was of 1988. Long story short, just like 2 weeks after we had prayed that, they came back and they said, we hate to tell you, Deb, we definitely want you taking this role, but we have no idea when we're going to be able to start this role for cities and schools. So I just knew it in my heart right there. This was it, and this was the jump that I needed to make.
But it's still, when you go to school for a particular field, and then you get into that field, and then you realize this really isn't the field you want to be in, it's very difficult. And people experience this where they're like, wow, I spent all this time and all this money, and now I'm not where I'm really happy. So is there anything you would say to someone who's just like, that's where they are, but they're still hesitant to kind of make the move because maybe they feel like they somehow wasted time or education, or they're afraid of even if it's not like starting a business where they're losing a stable income, maybe they would go to a different job that would have a regular paycheck, but they're still concerned, like it's holding them back. What would you say?
Yeah, and I would say that's very, very real. And in my book, Bold Mission, that's really what it's all about, because it's courageously pursue your calling, whatever you feel that to be. And so when you're at that stage, the book is very practically based. So in other words, literally sitting down and saying, when I leave this job, what am I leaving on the table? When I take this job or career, what am I gaining? And comparing the two. And then evaluating in your own life, my values are X. So as I look at what I'm leaving behind and what I'm gaining, which one matches best with my values in life? That is the best way to look at these kinds of things, because there's always going to be a financial implication. Always.
Of course.
There's going to be a huge learning implication. Right? So all of those things, and if you're a mom or a dad or you have children, there are implications for your entire family. And in my book, I have about 8 people who I use as examples of jumping right in, many of whom had children. And so you really have to weigh very carefully. On the other hand, if you're unhappy with what you're doing, that is the time to take a look very seriously at other opportunities as they knock on your door.
Yeah, so part of what you're really talking about is like change. And just everything that is involved in change.
Yep.
But you bring up another C word, calling, which is an interesting word. And I want you to define what you mean by calling.
Okay. So I would say when you begin to evaluate what your calling is, and another word for that is your purpose in life. I think the older you are, the more you're able to do that. And how do you do that? How do you find your purpose? That's in the book as well, is how do you think through the process of that? And what does calling mean? And it really means when you can blend your experience and expertise with your passion for something, you put it together and it brings you joy.
Yeah.
And that is when you know it's your calling, because you not only love what you're doing, but you're successful at what you're doing. And people come to you for that because they know that they can count on you to deliver.
Right, so that validation where you love doing something, but people also love that you do it.
Correct.
Yeah, they see the direct benefit.
Right.
So tell us a little bit now about your career, in starting an insurance firm to actually moving up the sort of the corporate ladder and to training, and just
Yeah.
Walk us through that journey.
Well, that was another very, very tough decision because about 3 years into owning my own business, leadership in the corporation came to me and said, look, we want you to consider a leadership role in this company. Well, by then, I had loved so much what I was doing, and particularly running the business. So I loved the people and all of the accounts that I was building, but I loved helping others build their businesses. So I was being called all over the country from other agents and management to say, come and speak here. Tell us how you're doing this. Why are you growing at such a rapid pace? What are you doing? What are your methods? What are your systems? And I'm very system oriented. So for me, that was a pleasure, and I was having so much fun doing that. But as the company recognized it, they said, wait a minute, that's what we want in leaders. Would you be willing to consider an executive leadership role? At the time, the first time they asked me, I said no. I love building a business, and of course I had my own independence. I owned my own business.
Right.
I could do what I wanted to do. My time was my own. But they came a second time, about 6 months to a year later. And at that point, I said, I really have to sit down and evaluate two things. Do I love running the business and managing the business more than what I love about developing the accounts and the sales part of the job? Which do I love more? Where do I find my passion? Where do I find my strength? Where do I feel joy? And it was fairly equal, but a little bit more maybe on the running the business side. And as I looked at it, at myself, what was I pursuing anyway? So my master's degree was already in that area. I had 24 hours toward a doctoral degree before I joined the company, and it was all in that area. So to me, that was a really good way of evaluating it. And here we go again. I took a jump. I took a jump now back into being an employee of a company
Right.
as opposed to owning my own business.
Right.
So again, evaluating what are the things you're leaving behind? Freedom, right? Mm-hmm. Time on your own, control, all of those things. But seeing the success of others grow was really important to me. Okay. And so that's when I made that decision. But it was a very tough one.
Yeah, it's kind of like the addition versus multiplication concept, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, you're doing great with addition and your own business, but if you get into the training, you're multiplying your impact many more times over.
Right.
So as a woman who is entering into the business world, and we're going back a few years now.
We are.
And so I would assume, and you correct me if I'm wrong, that there's a lot less women than there are men. Yeah. And so you're taking on that challenge. Mm-hmm. And of course, this is the challenge for many women today, their professional life, their family life. If they're moms, you're not a mom, but but you know all about it, and you have sisters, and I knew your mom and all your sisters, so you come from a big Italian family, you know what that's all about. Yeah. So how did you handle that? Because that's sort of this work-life balance and that whole thing. What would you say to that?
Well, I'll respond to both things that you mentioned, because the first one is also very real, which is surprising because even in today's environment, there are some industries, for example, that are primarily male-dominated, and so women still struggle with that in some cases. And how best do I go to the next level when the majority of my peers are males, and what do I have to do differently? So I've done tons of coaching over the years for women in executive positions and or looking at an executive position, and how do you handle yourself appropriately as one or one of the few females. And that was true for me all the way through, especially in my executive leadership roles. I was often the only woman in the room. And so there's things that you can do that really help move yourself forward in ways that make sense and are appropriate. The other answer to the question... How about
example? Just one example of that. So, what would be one?
So my advice to women has always been, and to men as well, but don't ever try to prove who you are. Be who you are. And that's the best advice I can give anybody, and particularly women, in an environment where if you're one of the few women in any position, in the room, talking, it doesn't matter. Just remember that you don't have to prove who you are. Be who you are by the decisions that you make, how you treat people, how you evaluate processes. All of those things come into play. That's who you are, and that's how you move to the next level. It has really nothing to do with the fact that you're female and they're male, or anything else. It just has to do with who you are and be who you are.
All right. How about the second part then, the whole balance thing?
And we were talking a little bit earlier, and I have been asked that question hundreds of times by women, and my answer to that is there is no balance ever. The word I replace that with is integration. So I'll give you an example. That when I was an agent running my own office, I had very, very little time to spend with my husband, which I missed desperately, but we had to find a way to integrate our lives. So he would come over at a certain time at my office, and we'd at least spend time talking and catching up for the day and having dinner together maybe. And then I was off for the night, meaning I had work to do, where sometimes I was in people's homes in that position that I was in at the time. Okay. So we had to learn how, and that's only one example, of how we learned to integrate my career with our family. And our family in that case, in my particular case, was with my husband. But it's true also for women, and I guess the message I would want to leave with them, because I think it's very important, is there is no perfect balance. You have to make intelligent decisions every week about, okay, where am I going to put my time? What's most important to me as a mom and as a wife, where I need to put a little more time over here than I do here. And so I think it's important, but never feel guilty that you don't have a perfect balance, because you never will.
All right. So I want to circle back to something, just because I'm a huge believer in this as well. And I've probably talked about this periodically in this podcast, although I don't do as many leadership themes in this podcast, believe it or not. I've been speaking on it for years, but that's just not the direction we go a lot of times. But you mentioned the word systems, and I'm an enormous believer in creating systems. And what we do talk a lot about on the Point of Impact is success. Yeah. And so I want you to just elaborate a little bit about creating systems and how systems lead to success.
And that's everything. What you just said is it. And when I've been asked to speak all over the country about how did you become such a success? How do you have a team of 6 people in your office and you're doing business like crazy every day, in and out, in and out? How do you balance all that? It's all about systems. And by nature, I'm a very systems-oriented person. But what's interesting is I was able to take that systems-driven way of life, so to speak, into every single promotion that I had in the company. And so that's why I could anticipate success, because as soon as I got to a new position, and by the way, every position I held, there was no manual. It was, oh, by the way, you're promoted today, you're going to go be a vice president. You're going to go be this or that. I'm like, okay, what does that mean, or how do I do that? There was no one to say, here's how you do it. So you had to be able to create your own systems for success. So I don't know how people can actually have a successful business without them. I do know this, that many entrepreneurs and creative people do not have systems by nature.
By nature,
so
yes.
What they do, which is the smartest thing you can do, right, is you hire to that. Yeah. So if that's your weakness, and you're the creative side, but you're not the other side, not the analytical side, then get somebody who is. And then your entire business is a success. It doesn't have to be you. So, and I've given that advice out to many, many entrepreneurs, because many have all that huge creative side and the vision, but they can't put all the particulars together.
Yeah.
And so if you don't have a blend, you find somebody who does.
Yeah. I hired a guy one time, and he was just struggling to get his work done. And I just began to break down how I did things, and the way that I created the systems so that I could get all of my work done.
Right.
And it can almost seem like boring or routine, but it's really like the train tracks that you can just, once you can get on them, and then you can start out that 50-mile-an-hour Amtrak. And I was just reading about this train in Spain that goes 190 miles an hour. You can go from 50 to 190 on tracks if you have the tracks, but you've got to lay them down. But I think you make a good point, because if someone says, well, that's just not me, I'm just not like that, then what I would say to you is what Deb just said. Find someone who is. Find someone who does have that kind of organized mind, that kind of step-by-step practical mind, and create the systems. And then really they run themselves, right?
They run themselves once you have them in place, as long as you stick to them. I will tell you something interesting, though. Something that I started when I was, that would have been 1988, I still do today. So it's literally calendaring and how I calendar electronically, and also how I run my entire day. I do it exactly as I did at the time that I started my business in 1988. So some of those systems, right, are good forever.
Forever,
right?
yes,
and you
yes.
modify
Yes.
for the times.
Yes.
But once you have them and you can work them, then your life is not crazy and you're not going insane.
Yeah, I have always, and I've talked about this before, always start my day the same way with my time with God, prayer, and again, coming out with a second devotional book because I believe in that devotional time, and that never changes. And then people say, oh, I just can't seem to deal with the anxiousness or the stress. If you start your day centered in the right place, and I really have never had those kinds of problems, even though I've had all kinds of challenging situations, because if you start the right way, again, just the system. The same thing with your exercise,
everything.
It doesn't matter what you're talking about, right? It applies. All right, so you have this successful career, and then you retire from corporate America, and you decide to do what?
So after I retired, everybody kept saying to me there who knew me well, why aren't you writing a book? You need to go write a book on leadership. And my response was always the same. Why would I write one more book on leadership? There are thousands of them out there. And why would I be, contributing anything that's going to be significantly different than what somebody else said? But it really hit me during COVID. I had already started a consulting business for executives primarily, and that had been evolving, which was getting really fun and different. And I'll tell you in a few minutes. But in the meantime, during COVID, I was listening to a podcast from another publishing firm who I was aware of, and they were doing a whole thing on coaching, which is what I was doing with executives. And the sixth person on the agenda that day said, you have to write a book because you have to lend credibility to what you do.
Okay.
Therefore, when you have your clients, you give them your book and they understand where you're coming from and what your experiences are. It just, for whatever reason, it just hit me.
It clicked.
And I said, that's right. That's what I need to do. And then what was happening is I was reading all of the statistics about young people at that time. So all the huge percentages of hopelessness and anxiety, suicidal ideation, and then following through with suicide. It was just horrible. And I thought, they need bold leadership. They need to know that there's somebody out there who can lead them in the right direction, because those individuals are following their calling. And so that's how I ended up writing the book. And then it blended well, here we go again, with experience, expertise, and passion for people and developing people. So my business was flourishing, as well as now the book that kind of blended right in there and integrated the two.
Okay.
So it was.
So what do you think, in all your years running your own business, corporate America, now as a business consultant and coach, what do you think is keeping people from pursuing their calling?
I would say the main reason is fear. And I talk a lot about that in my book, because it's the number one thing. And it's fear of the unknown, right?
Right.
Jumping into something you have no clue what you're talking about. You've never done it before. You have no experience, expertise, or whatever. And financially, often there is something you have to either, lose, or you have to contribute in a different way financially, and it's that loss of income or a steady income. Or what if I don't make it at all? Then what? Right?
Right.
If you have a family, it's loss of family time. And it would be, because when you start something new, you have to learn everything, usually from scratch. So there's loss of family time. So fear of all of those things. And you can put them all under one title of fear, because you're jumping in and not knowing anything about that. And it is the unknown, because as many stats as you can read about others who've done this particular move that you're ready to make, it may be a little different for you. Yes, is it the best you can do? And that's in my book too, is to do your research and find out what you should anticipate.
Yeah.
But you never really know. My opinion would be, do not let fear stop you. If you believe that this is your calling from the Lord, go for it.
It is amazing how fear impacts people.
It is.
In all of my years of leadership, I believe it's the number one issue.
It is. I agree.
It's just time and time again.
Yeah.
People fear the future. People fear
Right.
rejection. People have financial fears.
Yep.
They fear failure.
Yep. Big time.
There's just fear after fear after fear that they have to get over. And what's interesting, you name your book, you title it Bold Mission, and the word for boldness in the Bible, in the Greek that the New Testament is written in, is parrhesia. And what that word means literally is fearlessness. So someone who's bold is fearless. But here's the thing about fearless. I don't think it's like, I like to think of it more not like fearless, but more like less fear. Because, you're not asking someone to become a superhero
No.
or some kind of warrior. You're just saying if you could have less fear of
Right.
failure, maybe
Right.
you could take that step that you need to take. If you could have less fear of rejection, then maybe you could put yourself out there. If you could have less fear of the future, of the unknown.
Yeah.
Not no fear, but just less fear, enough to be able, because really you can have fear-based or faith-based decisions.
Absolutely.
And what you're really advocating for is more faith-based decisions.
Absolutely. And one of the best ways to get over that fear, not only with faith in the Lord and what he can do and why he's leading you this way, but literally and practically is writing it down. What are my fears?
Literally writing them?
Literally,
Okay.
writing it down. And then the opposite side of that. And here's the question. What if I don't?
Right.
What if I don't?
Yeah. What if you don't? What are you going to miss?
That's the biggest question. Right. And what will others not get from me that I could be offering if I don't do this?
Right.
And that's a huge question.
Yeah. Again, that's part of that whole multiplication concept, where you're saying, if I'm going to make a difference with my life, then I can't just think about me.
Right.
I've got to think about others. And that's really that whole idea of influence. What does it mean to have influence? And I think that's what you're really getting at, is you're saying, I wanted to be a person who influenced others in a positive way.
In a positive way, right. The biggest joy I ever got in my role as an executive was watching others shine. That was my biggest joy. That was when I felt completely fulfilled, is when I watched them grow, go to the next level, get the job they wanted, etc., right? And so, to me, what I'm doing now is basically that. Now I'm able to give back from experiences and expertise that I've gained over the years and help somebody else go to where they would like to go. And that's the joy that brings you.
And you're doing that now, like with just like individual business owners or executives?
Yes.
And you're just coaching them up to be able to
Yeah,
take
I'm
the
actually
steps?
I've also worked with entrepreneurs and starting their businesses. And then it's also branched off into assisting others with public speaking. So I was working with a doctor who had left traditional medicine for integrative medicine in cancer research. And he was going to be speaking before huge crowds of doctors and letting them know this jump that he had made and why they should be looking at integrative medicine. And he wanted me to help him with getting that presentation to where it would really, really catch them. And, looking at with the end in mind always is what do you want that audience to do when you're done? What action do you want them to take? Well, he wanted them to understand and jump into this game of at least thinking about integrative medicine. Long story short, we worked on that first presentation. He got a standing ovation. And then we worked on several others after that.
Okay.
So, and he was speaking literally at that point, being invited around the world to speak. So then we had other occasions where people were being asked to tell their story. Their stories were unbelievable, but they didn't know how to put it together. If you're asked to speak 15 minutes and tell your story or an hour, big difference.
Big difference.
What does that look like? So my own coaching business evolved into that, which I love.
Yeah, it's great. Yeah. Well, it's been great from a professional standpoint just to hear all this. Of course, it's fun that my own cousin, my older cousin.
That's right,
has, with
That's
all
true.
of her wisdom, has been able to share with us today. But really, it's especially for women that are looking for an example, someone that they can look to, who's been successful, who knows there's no real balance, but learning how to adjust. It's good, and it's been great to have you. Again, Deb's book is Bold Mission. You can get it, I assume, on Amazon or wherever.
Yep. And there's also an audio available if they want it.
Okay, great. It's been great having you on Point of Impact
Thank
podcast
you very
today.
much.
Thanks for listening. We'll see you next week.
You've been listening to the Point of Impact podcast with Rick McDaniel. Thanks for tuning in, and we look forward to you joining us for our next episode.